Good morning and welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today I'm going to show you how I make my sourdough loaf bread. This is the bread that we eat every week, all week, unless I make a special loaf of something, but this is the sourdough bread that I keep going. And we have for breakfast, if we want sandwiches, we use it for toast, for eggs. But anywho, this is our sourdough starter. Her name is Joan. Joan has been good to us. I started her on January 1st of 2021 and she's been going strong since then. She has made us lots of bread. I've made bowls, I've made loaves, I've made lots of different recipes for sourdough, and she has come through. She is good, she's strong, she's mature. Anywho, so to get started with the sourdough loaf bread, we pour in 1 cup of sourdough starter. You want to make sure your sourdough starter is nice, bubbly, and active. As I said, she's been going for about 2 years now, so she is good to go. If you'd like a video of how to get started with a sourdough starter, then I'd be more than happy to make that. Just let me know. Next, we're going to add 2.5 cups of warm water. So I go ahead and I pour the filtered water straight from the fridge in the pitcher to a measuring cup. Measure out about 2.5 cups. Put it in the microwave. I'll microwave it for about 45 to 55 seconds, and that gets it at the perfect warm temperature. While that water is heating up in the microwave, I keep 2 jars specifically for the sourdough starter. They're both WEC jars. I ordered them, I believe, on Amazon. It could have been through the WEC website. I can't remember, honestly. But in between making my loaves each week, or whenever I need them, I will then take the leftover starter and I'll put it in a new clean jar. So I just interchange between each of these jars to make sure that my jar stays clean between each time I bake a new loaf. So this new jar, I'll just put the glass lid on top of it, and it will go in the very back of the top shelf of our refrigerator. You can see that I've already poured the warm water into the starter, into my mixing bowl. And from there, I'm going to go ahead and soften a 1/2 cup or 1 stick of butter. I use salted butter. It just tends to work for whatever I'm making in the kitchen. I rarely have unsalted butter, so just use what you have. And I do soften that in the microwave if I don't leave it out overnight on the counter to soften itself. You can see the bubbles working in the warm water and the starter in the bowl. It is active. I just take a spatula and get that all stirred up together before placing the softened butter into the mixing bowl. While we're waiting for the butter to be softened, I'm going to go ahead and add our 1 tablespoon of salt to the mixture. I just use a natural sea salt. I believe it's Morton's brand. All right, there's my softened butter. Just put that right into the mix. And after this, we are going to actually move the bowl over to our stand mixer. You can do this by hand, but I do prefer using a stand mixer just because generally I'm doing other things while making this bread, and having the machine work for me while I am doing other things, it makes life a whole lot easier. Oh, I almost forgot, this is optional. We do like about 2 tablespoons of honey in our loaves of bread. This recipe does make 2 loaves, so 2 tablespoons, 1 for each essentially. Alright, as I said, we're going to go ahead and move this over to the stand mixer. I have a KitchenAid, and since using the dough hook and making all of our bread for the past, well, this past year, I've made all of our bread. We haven't bought any. Everything from hamburger buns to pretzels to loaves of bread, French bread, biscuits, rolls, all kinds of things. So it's been really fun to learn how to make different things that I didn't think I could make, and I just needed to go buy at the store. But actually, it's really darn easy. Okay, we're going to start with 3 cups of flour. You'll notice I'm doing more than 3 scoops. That's because this is a 1/2 cup measuring cup. Don't let that fool you. But starting out with 3 cups of flour, I just use the King Arthur all-purpose flour. That comes from, just get it in a bag at Walmart. And I'll let that mix in until it's almost incorporated. We're going to gradually add in the flour until you reach a total of about 7.5 to 8 cups. I usually start with 7. If I feel like, there may be more water in the mixture, I'll add 7.5 to 8. And if it's, a pretty balanced mixture, I'll stick with the 7 cups. This time I actually went with 7 cups. And it worked out wonderfully. The dough was like the perfect texture, perfect consistency. Not too sticky, not too dry. So I think I'm going to try to stick around the 7 to 7.5 cups from this point forward. As the flour incorporates into the wet mixture, you start to see where it comes away from the bowl and it starts forming a nice smooth ball. Although it's not exactly where we want it, this is how you want it to look throughout the kneading process, whether you're doing it by hand or if you're doing it in your stand mixer or your mixer in general. I would not recommend using a hand mixer with a kneading dough hook. I have actually tried that in my early days of making bread, and it did not pan out well. I'll just tell you that. It's too much dough for that small hook. So if you don't have a stand mixer with a dough hook, I do recommend doing it by hand. And after you've added your proper amount of flour that you need for the recipe, try to use a greased surface or oiled surface rather than using more flour, because the more flour that you have down on your kneading surface, the more flour you're incorporating into your dough, and that can prove to make your dough more dense or your loaf more dense as it bakes. So I do recommend an oiled or greased kneading surface. So once it starts coming towards the end of being kneaded, I typically do stop the kneading process and just double check and see how it's going. I'll just take a piece of dough and I'll pull it apart to see how well the dough stretches or how well the dough is coming together. Here you can see when I pull it apart, it's just pulling off in chunks. It's just pulling off in chunks. It's not stretchy like you want it. Some people say you want to see a window pane. You want to be able to stretch it so thin that you can see light through it. I typically do not get to this point. I get it to where it stretches a bit and then, go from there. This is my large Pyrex glass bowl. This is what I use to allow the dough to rise in because it is the largest bowl that I have. What I've done is I've what I've done is I've oiled the inside of the bowl with coconut oil, and from there I'll remove the dough ball from the mixer bowl into the oiled glass bowl so that it can rise overnight. All right, in this bowl I'm just kind of kneading it in itself, just making sure that it's all brought together, and I get it into sort of a ball shape, and then from there I will scoop it out using my bench scraper into the oiled bowl and just make sure that it's a nice uniform shape. It's a personal preference. You don't necessarily have to. You can just dump it in there, put a cover on it, and you're good to go. But I like to make sure it looks a little neater than it does already. If you don't have a bench scraper, I do recommend getting one if you're going to be making a lot of bread. It makes things a heck of a lot easier. It's not a necessity, but it does make things easier, just like most tools in the kitchen are not necessities, but yes, they do make things easier. So what I do is take press and seal. I don't know about you, but cling wrap really irritates me, so I have always had press and seal in my kitchen because it's way less of a headache. It's wonderful. I really like it. So what we're gonna do is just cover this bowl with plastic wrap, or you can use a wet towel, a damp towel rather, and you're gonna place it in a warm corner of your kitchen or a warm section, and it's gonna sit there overnight. I did not mention that I typically make this dough in the evening. I'll do it after supper, and then it will sit in this corner until the morning. All right, the next morning we have our risen dough. Isn't it beautiful? So I'm gonna clear off a section of the counter. I do use just my countertop to shape the dough. It's a butcher block countertop, so it's good for this type of stuff. All right, just scooping this out onto the countertop, and then I'm gonna use the bench scraper. As I was mentioning earlier, I'm just gonna cut it right down the center because this recipe is for 2 bread loaves. I'm just gonna put the other one back in the other bowl while we're working on this one. And the first step that I do is I flatten it out in a rectangle, get all the air bubbles out. I flatten it out into a rectangle, and then I roll long way to long way rather than short to short. And from there you can shape it into a loaf. Now you'll see my hands, they will kind of be touching the counter, and I'll be adding friction to get the loaf tighter and tighter. You want it to be as tight as possible before you put it into your loaf pan. That way when it expands and rises, it proves to be a tighter, better loaf. As I keep doing these motions, you can see how tight the loaf is looking. It's more smooth on the top, the edges are more round, and it's looking more and more like a bread loaf. I just plop that into an oiled loaf pan. I use the Pampered Chef ones. I've gotten one from eBay and one from Goodwill in great shape, so you can find those really cheap if you'd like. I like them a lot. They're really large, so they don't allow the bread to rise as high, I feel like. But as far as baking and like not having to use parchment paper and things in a metal pan or a glass pan, I've really enjoyed using those because the bread just slides right out. And I just oil it with coconut oil. And this one I've just kind of sped through because it's the same process as I did on the first loaf. This one you can see that I kind of stitched the dough together, but other than that, it's still the same process. All right, we're gonna plop that into the second loaf pan that we have here. There you have it. We have our 2 loaves there. All right, we're just gonna place those 2 loaves in a 375-degree oven, Fahrenheit, and they will bake for 45 minutes. Sometimes it'll be 50 if you want a browner top. But there they are, and I hope that you enjoyed watching this process. Again, these are just basic loaves that I make every week, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and we will talk soon. Have a good one.